Welcome, RJ. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm so excited to have the chance to talk to you today. And I'd like to start by talking about kind of the big news coming out of Rivian right now, which is the R2 vehicle. I recently got to ride in it, got to drive it a little bit. It's a lot of fun. And I'm hoping you can start us off by talking a little bit about the R2 and what it means for Rivian as a company.
Yeah, I mean, Rivian launched our first product in 2021, and is this on? There we go. Take two. So Rivian launched our first product in 2021, and this is it's our flagship product. And so the average selling price of an R1 is around $90,000. R2 represents really our first mass market vehicle. So the starting price at $45,000. The product itself is phenomenal. It's really fun to drive. It fits all your gear, your stuff, and it has a lot of the essence of what is in the R1, but embedded in a smaller, much more affordable.
Awesome. And it's interesting because the title of our session today is Under the Hood of Building Rivian, but I want to ask a funny kind of literal question, which is, if you pop open the hood of a Rivian, what do you see? Because it's not an engine.
Yeah, in the front of a Rivian, or what often people call the frunk, there's a storage compartment, so it's a big open bin. And the frunk on the R2, biggest front storage trunk of any vehicle in that class, and the same is true for R1, it's the biggest in that class.
Mm-hmm. So I want to back up because this is a conversation about how you built Rivian, and building a car company takes an enormous amount of money and an enormous amount of infrastructure. I've been to your facilities in Normal and I've seen what it looks like. So walk us back to 2009 or so when you're starting off Rivian. How do you do that? How do you start building a company that is so capital intensive and difficult?
I mean, building a car company, you have to have a lot of, because it's such a complex thing to create. And in the beginning, when you start to look at all the things you need, you recognize very quickly you need a lot of capital, so many billions of dollars. You need a team of thousands of engineers. You need hundreds of suppliers. You need a manufacturing plant that, as you said, is enormous. These are multi-million square foot facilities. You need a brand that people are going to like and care about. And on top of all that, you need technology that's compelling. And so in the beginning, you have none of that. You have none of those ingredients. And when you realize this, it's sort of all the stuff that has to be created. And do
you want to switch mics? You'll be talking more than me, so.
Maybe, I don't know if that's... There we go. Oh, this is much better. So you look at all the things that have to be created, and it's very, very challenging to start. Like, you don't have the capital to develop the technology, you don't have the technology to raise the capital. And so for Rivian, it was just a process of slowly getting all the ingredients there to be able to start to ramp.
Okay, so we've talked about how it costs, you need billions of dollars to start a company, a car company. How do you even start that process? How do you get your first million, your first 100 million, your first $500 million?
Yeah, so the first 100,000 is really hard. And in Rivian's case, I refinanced the house that I had and used that to fund the company. But beyond that first 100,000, it was really a difficult exercise to pitch investors. Just the idea of pitching someone, you hear a pitch for a car company with one person, 26-year-old founder. It's a really tall order. So it took some time for me to get traction with investors, find the right types of investors. But ultimately, between, let's say, 2009 when I started the company and 2016, we probably raised, and it ramped up, but about $100 million. Between 2017 and 2021, we raised $14 billion. And so it took time to get enough momentum, but then once we started to establish momentum, we brought in an incredible set of investors, we raised a lot of money, and built a large, complex business.
So part of building Rivian involved a pivot at some point, and with a lot of founders and entrepreneurs, I feel like that happens where they realize the first product or the first iteration isn't exactly what they want to go forward with. And so at Rivian, that happened kind of in the very early days where you worked on a hybrid vehicle prototype, and that at a certain point you realized you needed a pivot. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that moment and if it was a challenging moment for you.
Yeah, I mean, every business, I think everybody who starts a business should recognize you should be really clear on what your vision is. So what's the big goal that you're trying to accomplish? But the tactics and the specifics are going to evolve many times. And sometimes those evolutions of the tactics or the specifics are small. And sometimes those are really large, like big shifts in the strategy. But when you're clear on the vision, it's like, for me, it's this process of checking the assumptions, checking what you're building. And so in the case of Rivian, our biggest pivot was really around what the product was, what the business model was. We started with the idea of a sports car. Sounds very different than where we ultimately ended up. We had a big pivot in like 2011, 2012, and then began the process of ultimately iterating on what became what you now know of as Rivian. But I was showing Rob earlier today, we went on a drive together, and between like a sports car and what you now know of as Rivian, there was many iterations of what does a Rivian look like. And today, it's very clear to me what a Rivian looks like. I think for folks that are familiar with the company, they know what a Rivian looks like, and you can sort of imagine what would a Rivian hatchback look like. But we didn't used to know the answer to that. And so we had to spend a lot of time iterating around the product, the features, the trade-offs we'd make. And so there's a bunch of things made along the way which we've never shown the world that don't look at all like a Rivian, but were designed and built by Rivian. And that was the process of learning. And I think every entrepreneur has the challenge of deciding when whatever you're building is good enough, or when you should iterate, when you should crumple up a paper, reset. And so we had a lot of that journey. It was not a straight line path at all.
And Rivian today is really built around a brand of adventure, large electric vehicles and now a smaller electric vehicle that are adventure-based. How did you land on that theme of adventure and kind of build it in an intentional way that I've noticed really resonates with people?
Yeah, in hindsight, everything always looks so clear and so linear, but we, in the context of trying to discover and understand what we really wanted to build towards, we spent time asking ourselves the question, like, why do we deserve to exist? Like, what gives us the right as a company to be a brand? And really arrived at a deeply held belief that the brand should exist for more than just the sum of the parts. It shouldn't just be a vehicle that's electric or a vehicle that's really exciting or fast in acceleration, but rather needs to have a deeper, broader purpose. And for us, that really quickly, as we start to ask that question, start to center around this idea of both enabling, but importantly, inspiring people to do the kind of things you want to take photographs of, which is sort of at the essence of transportation. It's the essence of traveling. It's to go accumulate these new experiences, to do things you want to remember 10 years from now. And so that idea of underpinning and inspiring adventure became so core to what we were doing, and then it helped inform product decisions and inform the way the products looked. There's lots of little features, little details in the products that speak to that. We have a flashlight that pops out of the door, for example. And those are all, essentially, embodiments of us trying to capture this essence of the brand in little design decisions across the product. And we have the same thing that exists across our physical spaces, and even internally. It's very much, permeates throughout the whole business.
And I'm wondering what it's like to be in the EV selling business today, because a bunch of really interesting things have happened in the industry. One is that the federal tax credit went away. Another is that there's been tariffs and trade uncertainty. Another factor is the rising price of oil. And so I'm wondering what it's like selling EVs today, at this point in time, with all those kind of large dynamic macroeconomic forces. Like, does that make your job difficult?
Well, in a sense, in the short term, I'd say yes. But the thing to keep in mind, I say this a lot, when you start a car company, you don't do it because you think it's going to be simple. So you fully appreciate and embrace from the beginning that this is going to be really hard. There's going to be things you don't expect. The likelihood, like in the beginning, when it was just me, the likelihood of success was so small. It wasn't like a coin toss. It was like throwing a toothpick through a straw across the street. Like the likelihood of that happening was so low. And so when things like tax incentives change, it's such a small shift that it, relative to the challenges that we've encountered, that we just don't really think of it as, oh shucks, this is really hard. We should pack up and go home, or get in our heads about it. We just continue to stay focused on, of course, what we're building is hard. If you're making things that are important, they're generally hard to do, and focusing on the things we can do. And that's in terms of how I thought about building the business. I've always looked at it to say, we're not going to be able to map out the next 200 steps, but we can look in front of us and see what are the next 10 steps we can make to make the likelihood of success higher. Or said differently, to reduce the things that could reduce the likelihood of success. And so that was true 10 years ago, and it's still how we're operating today.
And so when you look at the competitive landscape today, the R2 is frequently compared to the Tesla Model Y. And so with that product and future Rivian products, are you trying to convince people to buy a Rivian but not a Tesla? Or do you see it differently?
In the electric vehicle space, particularly in the United States, there's very little choice. And so in the premium price category, so where Rivian currently operates with our R1 products, we have by far and away the largest market share. So the R1S is the best-selling premium electric SUV in the United States. In fact, it's the best-selling premium SUV, electric or non-electric, in 6 different states, including California. But the size of market, as I said earlier, for a $90,000 car is just fairly limited. And so when you look at the overall market, there's really been one dominant market share player, which of course is Tesla. And they do that with 2 products, the Model 3 and the Model Y. And so not surprisingly, because we're now launching a product R2 that's priced almost at the same level as where the Model Y is. It's also a 5-passenger midsize SUV. The natural question is like a direct comparison to say, you're either, it's a false binary to say, you're either going to buy a Model Y or a Rivian and that's it. The reality is, and actually the goal of the business is to not just attract people from a Model Y, but more importantly, attract people from all the other things that you buy. And so that's, all the midsize SUVs that are out there, and these are all internal combustion or in some cases hybrid vehicles. But the scale of that market's huge. So the average price of a new car in the United States is around $50,000. By far the most popular configuration is a 5-passenger SUV. Tesla represents about 4% of that market share. So there's 96% of the market is buying something that's not a Rivian and not a Tesla. And so that's where we see just a really large opportunity. And that means people are going to be getting drawn in from, maybe it's a Grand Cherokee, maybe it's a Toyota RAV4, maybe it's a Land Rover. There's all different types of vehicles that exist across that price category. And that's what makes it so exciting. The diversity of our customers, the diversity of folks that we can draw on is really, really exciting.
And so while we're speaking about cars that aren't Rivians and aren't Teslas, Rivian recently, or a couple of years ago, struck a joint venture deal with the Volkswagen Group.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through exactly how that's going to work? Because my understanding is that there will be Rivian technology, these things called ECUs or electronic control units, that go into different vehicles from the Volkswagen Group, different brands. So can you walk us through how does that work, and what should customers expect to see in something like an Audi or a VW down the line?
Yeah, so the auto industry's, there's a lot of reasons why technologies evolve differently in automobiles, but one of the big ones is car companies historically were not built as software companies or computer design companies. They don't really design electronics, they don't design software. And as a result, this has long been something people talk about, which is your consumer electronics are so much more advanced than your car. Why is that? And so in the case of Rivian, and I'd say similarly in the case of Tesla, we took the approach of really building a tech-centric business. So we have more software developers than any other technical domain, with certainly a lot more than mechanical engineers. And we made the decision to vertically integrate the way we design all of the computers in the car, so what we call ECUs, and then the entirety of the operating system. And I remember in 2017, 2018, we're having some discussions around this, and some of our investors were saying, hey, should we make all this stuff in-house? And I was like, we absolutely should. And if we do this really well, we'll probably be able to sell it to other manufacturers. Fast forward to, let's see, 2024, and we ended up doing the largest software licensing deal in the history of the automotive industry. It's a $5.8 billion deal where Rivian technology is now being embedded across the Volkswagen Group portfolio products. That's Porsche, Audi, Volkswagen, a bunch of brands that aren't sold in the United States, brands like Skoda or Seat. And so those will be our platform, our software, and lots of other vehicles. And it's a really exciting thing for our teams because it allows us to help make more cool electric cars under brands beyond just Rivian.
And so while we're talking about software, I'm interested in hearing you speak a little bit about artificial intelligence, because you had an artificial intelligence day late last year. You revealed that Rivian had actually created its own artificial intelligence, processor. How important do you see AI and autonomy towards, to the future of Rivian? Are steering wheels going to become optional? Some of us like to drive, so maybe we don't like the way that sounds. But how does the AI fit into the future of Rivian and all the investments you're doing in that space?
Well, in general, I should say I and Rivian are very bullish on AI integrating into the physical world. And I think autonomous vehicles and higher levels of autonomy than what we experience today, but the idea of the vehicle being able to drive you and then drop you somewhere and drive itself empty, or go pick up your kids, or go to the grocery store, or allow you to sit in the car and be on your phone or reading a book. We think that's going to be very much part of the customer experience in the very near term, meaning in the next couple of years. And so we've been investing in this extremely heavily since the last few years, really since 2022. And the AI day that we had late last year was to start to showcase what's to come. And so later this year, we'll be rolling out what we call a point-to-point full navigation integration. So you type the address in, the vehicle will drive you there, but your hands are off the wheel, but your eyes are still paying attention. So this is similar in many ways to what Tesla has with FSD. But then in 2027, we allow you to go eyes off. So you can go hands off and eyes off. So you get your time back. And that's what's often called level 3 self-driving. And then the next level, which happens for us in 28, is the idea that the vehicle can completely drive itself. And so this is a core focus for us. We think that does change the way you think about your interaction with the car, changes the way you think about ownership of the vehicle. But it's, I think, maybe the most important point, if you take nothing else away from this talk, is I think we as humans, this is like a human psychology thing, we tend to look to the past as a way to try to predict the future. And if you look at the rate of progress that's happening in AI, and you were to say, I think the next 5 years are going to look a certain way, and you look back, let's say from 2021 through 2026, and use that as your guide or your predictor for how fast some of these technologies are going to advance, I think you'd be wildly misled. The rate of progress with the introduction of transformer-based encoding and modern neural net architectures and VLA, VLM architectures is so much faster, like worlds faster than what was done up until like 2022, 2023. And we're just beginning to hit the stride of seeing this incredible rate of progress in AI. And so the reason I say that is that directly links to how our vehicles can drive themselves. So if you think of a self-driving car from 2021 and compare it to a self-driving car of 2026, of course we've improved as an industry, but the rate of change and the level of difference we'll see between today and 2031 is in many ways hard to imagine. The idea, like when I say imagine the car going to pick up your kids, and the idea of it goes to the grocery store to get groceries for you, it sounds like, oh, that guy's probably crazy, it's not going to happen that fast. I think that it is going to happen that fast, if not faster. And I'm very close to it. So we're seeing the models generalize faster. We're seeing the way the models are being built with, of course, agentic support. The model, where AI is helping us build better AI. So that the speed at which all these things are moving is, I think, wildly underappreciated by most of the general public.
And that brings me to a little bit of a philosophical question, talking so much about AI, software, and services. I'm wondering if you see Rivian as an auto company that's very tech forward, or you see it as a tech company that makes AI, that makes electrical components, and also makes cars.
I think it's sort of a false binary. I think you can be both. You can be an AI company and also make cars, and you can be a car company that also does AI. So we look at, in our case, we have to do both. If we had great AI but the wheels fell off the car, I don't think we'd be very successful. And if we had a vehicle that didn't have AI integrated in it, particularly in the next few years, I don't think it'd be a very successful car either. So we really need both.
Mm-hmm. And I've heard you talk, before in podcasts and in other settings about the future, and a future where all cars are electric and have some autonomy aspects to them, or some AI-driven autonomy aspects to them. Do you still see that as the future, where the people who are driving gas cars, that it's maybe more of a little bit of an antique? Or do you really see that it's kind of like all EV, or maybe a mix, or maybe you also see like other companies like Scout doing things like the E-Rev, where there's a gas-powered generator. So how do you see the future? Is it an all EV future?
It's just a question of timescales. I think if your timescales measured in the next 5 years, I think there's going to be a lot of combustion vehicles on the road. If your timescales the next 25 years, I think it's going to be very rare to see a combustion-powered vehicle on the road. And I think that it's sort of, we should take a moment, like as culturally and from a societal point of view, appreciate that we are living in an inflection point. And so if you think of, there's like two major inflection points. So the first is, as a society, like as a species, we lived a certain way on our planet for thousands of years. So the idea of traveling across the world in a matter of hours, or eating strawberries in cold climates, and like all these things that we just take as like so for granted, we don't even recognize that, like in the history of humanity, it's only been a few generations where we can do that. That was all built with the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, which is only it's crazy, but it's only 150 years ago. And the Industrial Revolution, of course, was powered by fossil fuels. Like, it wouldn't have happened without the discovery of this very accessible, easily extractable energy, which was coal and petroleum, liquid fuel. And that created the world we now know, and that created the world that just seems so normal to us, but would seem so incredibly foreign to someone from just a few hundred years ago. But the first inflection point is this world that we've created that's dependent on fossil fuels. We have to now move away from fossil fuels. So our moment in time, we're going to see that shift to a carbon-free economy. So we're going to see, over the course of the next half a century, the entire planet, which was defined by fossil fuels, redefine itself around carbon-free energy. And so that means electric cars, that means different ways of transportation, that means different ways of growing food, different ways of powering our homes. All these things are going to change. And that's a really big shift. So I've said this before, but I think in the history books, 1,000 years from now, they're going to look back at like the time period we're in, and this is the end of the fossil fuel era. And the history books will say there was this like 150-year blip in the history of humanity where humanity rapidly industrialized and did all that with fossil fuels. We used about half of this fossil fuel base that was built up on the planet, which, by the way, is interesting as well. It took hundreds of millions of years to build the fossil fuel base, and we used about half of it in like 150 years. But it'll be a very interesting set of chapters in history books. And then the next portion will be the AI era, or the birth of the AI era. And again, in the history of humanity, this is the first time we've been able to create representations of neural net intelligence that today are, in many cases, much better than humans, but in not too much time are going to be better than humans at almost everything. And we're going to live through that. We're going to have to navigate what that means to society. We're going to have to navigate what that means to the way we run the politics, the way we think about capitalism, the way we think about jobs, the way we think about how we use our time, the way we think about education. These are really big, like incredibly interesting questions. And somehow, like just by chance, this is why I say we should appreciate this, we happen to be alive at these two inflection points. Like if you were born 200 years from now, the AI transition would have already happened, the fossil fuel transition would have already happened, or if you were born 100 years ago, you wouldn't be alive right now. But just by sheer chance, I don't know how, it's a deeper question, all of us, our humanity, our aliveness is in this moment. And so as society, we get to help navigate these very interesting, complex, and societal shifting transitions that the history books will talk a lot about in a few thousand years. And so, anyways, I say that because like extended range electric vehicles, like that's all just like teeny little bits of noise on this journey to being carbon neutral. So sure, there's going to be engines for another 10, maybe 15 years. There's going to be people who are like really against electric vehicles because they want the sound of their engine. But like in the fullness of time, it's very, very clear what the world's going to look like. And it's it is going to be, it's not going to be, carbureted engines or fuel injected engines. It's going to be a very different world than this.
And we've been speaking a lot about different forms of technology today. And you recently started a new company called Mind Robotics that you're leading. There's also another company called Also that was spun out of Rivian that has to do with micromobility. Can you tell us a little bit about what those two companies do? And I'm also wondering if you being involved in 3 different companies isn't like enough to make your mind explode. Like, how do you do that?
So we talked mostly about Rivian here today. I have 2 other companies. So the first is a micromobility company. And as you said, the name of the company is Also. And it's a clever name, but the reason we called the company Also is it was born out of a Skunk Works division within Rivian, where we really asked the question of, if we're going to electrify the world, and we're going to electrify transportation, we need to electrify more than just vehicles. And we need to also electrify everything else. And so that's scooters, motos, quadricycles, tuk-tuks, anything that's moving on our planet is ultimately going to be electrified. And so Rivian's focus is on vehicles as we know them, and Also's focus is on all the other stuff with wheels. And so the first thing Also is launching is really a rethink of an e-bike. It's just a phenomenal product. If you go to Rivian's Roadhouse, I see Chris, who's running Also. It's just such a cool product. I highly recommend trying it. But think of it as the first of a library of products that we're going to be launching that work to help redefine how we think about transportation through different modalities. So there's vehicles, there's going to be bikes, there's going to be quadricycles, there's going to be microcars, there's going to be things that are even hard to think about today, but they allow us to move through cities, through urban environments. So that's Also. The other company is a company called Mind Robotics, and so I recently started this. It was late last year. We raised a seed round of financing, and the purpose of Mind is to think about robotics through the lens of creating human-like capabilities for industrial applications. And so we've raised over $600 million for the company. We're deploying robots first within Rivian's existing footprint and to do human-like tasks. I'm incredibly excited and bullish on this. And we're building both a foundation model, so a brain for how to operate inside of a plant, but also the mechatronic embodiments or the robotics to then actuate what the brain is capable of understanding. And I think this is really how we both lower the cost of goods by making manufacturing a lot cheaper, but also allow manufacturing to really become a strength in the Western world where we don't have labor availability, and cost of labor is also very hard to compete globally here. And so, so Mind is a super exciting business that I'm building as well.
All right, we have about a minute left, and I want to make sure we close by asking you about what advice you might have for founders or entrepreneurs who are trying to build something very difficult, because I think building a car company does sound very difficult in terms of the money and the facilities, and a lot of entrepreneurs are also building things that are difficult. They might not be car companies, but they might be something else. So what have you learned along the way through this journey, and what advice might you have?
Well, I think if you're starting a business, most entrepreneurs tend to be very optimistic. Most successful entrepreneurs, I should say, are highly optimistic. But I think the most successful entrepreneurs can be simultaneously wildly optimistic, but also can be real with themselves around what the challenges are. And so you're not just living in a world of, oh, it's all going to work out, it's going to, things are going to be great, but you have confidence you're going to figure it out, but then you're focused on solving the hard problems in front of you. And so, how does that manifest? I think in any business, invariably, I think everybody has this story of how somebody told them it was a bad idea. And the harder and more complex the idea is, the more likelihood, or the higher likelihood you're going to have a lot of people tell you it's a bad idea. And so I've been through that in many different ways. So Rivian was a really, really bad idea for a very long time from a lot of people. There's still some people that tell me it's a really bad idea. And you have to have the ruggedness or the thick enough skin to not let that dissuade you, but at the same time, there's probably chances to hear feedback. Why do you think it's such a bad idea? Why is it going to fail? And then go to work on those things. And that was true for Rivian. It's still true today. It's true in how we built Also. It's also true in how building a robotics company. But I think having the resolution to build, even when people tell you it's hard, or even when you yourself know it's hard, but make progress by taking one step at a time.
I think that's a great place to end. RJ Scaringe, thank you so much for joining us today.